All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us today for the Hill Prizes information session. We're really glad to have you here. My name is Terrence Henry. I'm the Executive Director of TAMEST. That stands for the Texas Academy of Medicine, Engineering, Science, and Technology. We really appreciate the time and interest and effort that you all are taking to prepare your applications for the Hill Prizes. And we hope this session provides some information that's helpful for you to create a successful proposal. We're excited today to share with you some additional details about the process and the timeline, and really have set aside a good amount of time to answer your questions. So thank you again for joining us and looking forward to the session today. I'll go over the agenda briefly, and then we'll introduce some of our speakers. First, we'll have a welcome and some words on the purpose and objectives of the Hill Prizes from our board president, Brendan Lee. Then we'll hear about the prize committee, the selection criteria and scoring, the timeline and process, and eligibility criteria and categories from our past board president, Dr. David Daniel. Then I'll go over some of the application materials that are required, as well as some of the funding guidelines and requirements. Then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A towards the end of the session. You're welcome to use the Q&A box. You can actually go ahead and ask your question during the session if it arises, and we'll get to it during the Q&A. There'll also be an opportunity to ask questions verbally during the Q&A, and we'll go over that process when we get to the Q&A. If we don't have an answer to your question today, we will follow up and get an answer and share that in our website. We have a website devoted to the Hill Prizes that has frequently asked questions. We encourage you to take a look at that, and we'll be updating that after today's session. We'll also be recording today's session, and we'll share a link with all of you attendees to that recording. It'll also be on our website, and we'll do the same with the slides from today's session. With that, I'm very happy to introduce our board president, Dr. Brendan Lee. He's the chair of molecular and human genetics at Baylor College of Medicine and a member of the National Academy of Medicine. After we hear from Dr. Lee, we'll hear from Dr. David Daniel. He's the past president of TAMEST and president emeritus of the University of Texas at Dallas. Dr. Lee is a member of the National Academy of Medicine, and Dr. Daniel is a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Our TAMEST program officer, Stephanie Shaw, is also here to help us today. I'm now pleased to introduce our board president, Dr. Brendan Lee.
Thank you, Terrence. Welcome to all of you to hear about this exciting initiative. For those of you who are new to TAMEST, we're a statewide society with a mission to foster collaboration, nurture the next generation of scientists, and advance research and the research enterprise in Texas. We were founded in 2004 by our honorary chair, Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, and Nobel laureates Michael Brown and Richard Smalley. TAMEST is currently composed of 340 Texas-based members of the three national academies: the National Academy of Medicine, the National Academy of Engineering, and the National Academy of Sciences, and also other honorary societies, as well as our 8 Nobel laureates. We are proud to partner with Lyda Hill Philanthropies to launch this new prize program. This will give $2.5 million in research funding to the top scientists and researchers in Texas. The Hill Prizes are named in honor of their benefactor, Lyda Hill, and her commitment to funding transformational advances in science and nature. This new program has 5 prizes in 5 categories. You'll hear more details about the program, the application process, and timeline during this session. Each of the 5 Hill Prize recipients will receive $500,000 in funding from the Lyda Hill Philanthropies to accelerate their proposed work. The Hill Prizes will fund high-risk, high-reward, big ideas and innovations that demonstrate very significant potential for real-world impact. They'll be an important source of seed funding to advance innovative science and highlight Texas as a premier destination of world-class research. We very much want to thank Lyda Hill and Lyda Hill Philanthropies for their support and commitment to driving scientific discovery forward. We look forward to advancing exceptional innovators, hopefully some of you on this call, and the most exciting research in the state, thanks to her vision and support. I now turn it over to Dr. David Daniel, our past board president and really a leader in this initiative, and Terrence Henry to tell you more about the Hill Prizes and to answer your questions. David?
Yeah, Brendan, thanks so much, and thanks for your leadership for TAMEST. I think the next slide shows the selection committee. I want to thank the 22 other people on the committee who have kindly agreed to serve. They are divided into 5 subcommittees, as you see here. Those 5 subcommittees align with the 5 different areas to which applications for the Hill Prize may be submitted. I want to emphasize that if you know any of these people, that's wonderful, but they are bound by confidentiality. So don't ask them about how to win the prize. Ask us today. That's the purpose of this meeting, to help you put together the best proposal possible. And don't ask them, obviously, how your proposal is doing in the system. But again, I thank these tremendous group of scientists, health professionals, engineers, and technologists for serving on the committee. Next slide, please. So I want to emphasize that if you see a member of the selection committee from your company or your institution, don't worry about that. You should apply and not feel like just because there's someone on the selection committee, or not anyone on the selection committee, that makes a difference. We do have a conflict of interest policy in place. Committee members may not apply or be involved in any of the applicant teams. Potential conflicts of interest must be disclosed, and in the case of a close personal relationship, could result in recusal. But I just want to emphasize to applicants that this is our challenge to manage the conflict of interest issues, so you just shouldn't worry about it. Put forward your best proposal possible to the Hill Prize program. Next slide, please. I'm sure you're wondering, well, how are we going to evaluate and score the proposals? The subcommittee members will evaluate applications based on 4 essential criteria that are listed here. The first is the uniqueness, I would say, and power behind the idea. How compelling is the idea? How important is the idea? But that is going to be a very important element. The word impact was mentioned earlier by Brendan as one of the goals and objectives of the Hill Prize. And I would say if there's one word that's the most important word in the evaluation criteria, it is the potential for impact. The $500,000 is really meant to be sort of a bit of a bridge fund, if you will, from an idea to impact. Sometimes impact is realized through taking an idea to scale, which often or usually involves a commercial application. But some ideas don't require commercial impact. For instance, it could be an educational impact that is not necessarily associated with a business. So we are very broad in our willingness to think about impact. It can happen in many different ways, but certainly that's going to be a key element in the review criteria. The strengths of the research group leader and team are going to be important. Please realize that we're not looking for how many medals and awards a group leader has accumulated, but rather how well qualified are they, the team and the principal investigator, to realize real world impact. And finally, the availability and ability of key personnel and infrastructure to execute the work and achieve success are going to be important. The review committee members are going to just ask themselves the question, can this group really pull it off? Do they have the people and the resources that they need to achieve success? So the committee members will individually rank all of the proposals that come to their subcommittee. So each of the applications will go to one of the 5 subcommittees. They will rank them, if you will, and then identify, after I'm sure a lot of discussion, up to the top 3 candidates in each category. So they will down select to 3, and then the 3 will be sent out for external review outside of the committee and outside of the state of Texas, for that matter. Next slide, please. This is the timeline. This is published. The key for you is August 11th, when applications close. As soon as they close, the subcommittees will begin their work. Next slide. They will rank order and then down select to 3 finalists. We will not announce those finalists, by the way. This is all completely confidential. We will identify at that point well-qualified external reviewers, mean external to Texas, to get independent reviews. Those reviews will come back. The subcommittee will meet and they will select a recommended winner in each of the 5 categories. Next slide, please. That will happen in late October, early November. The full committee then will meet. I'll convene that meeting and we'll make final recommendations. Those 5 recommendations for winners then go to a committee composed of TAMEST members who won a Nobel Prize or a Breakthrough Prize. Assuming that's endorsed, that will then go to the TAMEST Board of Directors in early December for review and approval. At that point, shortly thereafter, we will notify those who did not win, as well as notifying those who do win, but we will not make public the winners until they're recognized at the TAMEST annual meeting February 5th. And in fact, one of the requirements for the principal investigator is that they be available to attend that meeting on February 5th so we can celebrate your winning idea. Next one, please. So who may apply? The principal investigator has to be a Texas-based applicant. You can be a TAMEST member, meaning a National Academy member, but you certainly don't have to be. I would just say we intentionally made this wide open to people in Texas. We just want great ideas from super overachieving people. The principal investigator has to be in their career for at least 15 years after their first full-time appointment, or 2008 or earlier, and I'll explain why in just a moment. They need not have spent all those 15 years in Texas, but they have to have spent at least the last 2 years as of the time of application in Texas. The team lead or the principal investigator has to meet these eligibility requirements. But these eligibility requirements do not apply to anyone except the PI. In other words, other team members can be younger in their career than 15 years. The institution or company that will receive the award to which the applicant is employed must approve the application. And we do this because the money will go to the company or institution or university or health science center or whatever it is, or not profit for that matter. And an authorized person to accept those funds under the required conditions that Terrence will talk about later must have approved it. We are encouraging particularly large companies or institutions that may have multiple submissions in the 5 different categories to down select the top 2 or 3 applications per category, but we are not requiring this. This is up to the institutions. We don't want to overload the review committee members with perhaps not terribly competitive proposals. But on the other hand, if an institution simply does not wish to identify or limit to the top 2 or 3, that's their choice. We're not requiring it. Next one, please. Why the 15-year requirement? That may seem strange to you. The reason is that we have a highly successful award program at TAMEST, the Edith and Peter O'Donnell Awards, that's just been spectacularly successful. That award program is meant for relatively younger researchers and technologists. For the research community, the winner has to be no more than 15 years into their career. We did not want the Hill Prize to overlap with the Edith and Peter O'Donnell Awards. So the 15 years or greater for the Hill Prize was put in place so that it would not compete with the 15 years or younger for the Edith and Peter O'Donnell Award recipients. We actually hope that we'll see some applications from former recipients of the Edith and Peter O'Donnell Awards, but I just wanted to explain to you why that rule, which may seem a little strange, is in place. How do you measure 15 years? It's by calendar year, anytime in the calendar year. So anyone who started their first full-time appointment starting in 2008 or earlier would qualify. We've been asked, what about postdoc appointments? Does that count as a full-time appointment? No, it does not. We do not consider a postdoc appointment the beginning of your full-time, let's say you're a faculty member, career. This requirement only applies to the principal investigator or team lead It does not apply to any of the other team members that you may want to identify. So what do you do if you're less than 15 years into your career? Does that mean you just can't be involved? No, one option is to identify someone who does meet these requirements, including the 15 years, who perhaps could be the PI or lead, and you could become a member of the team. We view that as an opportunity to gain some mentorship from a more senior person. But I would note that the PI has to be actively involved in the project. You can't just sort of window dress with a senior person and pick somebody who's not going to be a key member of the team and very actively involved. Next one. So which category should you choose? You must choose one and only one category. Medicine, engineering, biological sciences, and physical sciences are intended primarily for academic and health centers. So if the lead, let's say, is at MD Anderson, they would want to submit their applications into one of these organizations. The technology award is really intended for businesses and private sectors, although not-for-profit research organizations can put their applications in any one of the 5 categories: medicine, engineering, biological or physical sciences, or technology. I want to emphasize that the industry or private sector, really, or for-profit companies, if you will, could be large established companies, they could be mid-sized companies, they could be startup companies with only 1 or 2 employees. There's no limit or bias on the size of the companies, but that's where private sector entities should be submitting their applications. Next one. So what about teams? We highly encourage teams within institutions, teams across institutions, teams of, let's say, academic and business enterprises. Remember, what we're looking for is impact, and that inevitably means taking something to scale. But there has to be only one lead institution and one principal investigator. And let's say that principal investigator and lead is from a for-profit company, then the team submission must go into the technology one. But I just want to encourage teams to be put together that mix businesses, universities, health science centers, not-for-profits, not just to make a big team, but to get the expertise and leadership in place to have an impact. So as you see, there has to be one PI and lead institution, and I mentioned earlier which one you should apply to. Next one, please. The team has to be concentrated in Texas, but that does not mean that you can't have a team member from outside of Texas. If, for example, there's a key person with crucial expertise to your team that's outside Texas, you should feel free to include that person on the team. But what would not play well with the review committee is if you have a token leadership from Texas and most of the work is being done outside Texas. That's not what we're intending to do. But certainly, if there's a key element from outside Texas, don't hesitate to draw them in. You can identify as your key personnel co-PIs, but there can only be one principal investigator. And so we require that you submit a bio for the PI and only one PI. That's up to 3 pages. You can submit biographical sketches, no more than 1 page each, for anyone else you want to identify. So you could just call them a team member or a co-PI if you want. But I would encourage you not necessarily to list everybody who might be involved in the program. We just want to see the key personnel. You're also not limited in terms of who can actually work on the project to who you've identified as key personnel. So pick the few people that you think are really essential and will help the review committee understand that you have the people and resources in place to pull it off. And I would just add, if you're, let's say, an academic institution looking to take an idea ultimately to commercialization, for me, I think I'd want to see someone who understands the commercialization space on that team. So think about the word impact and think about the people you need in order to maximize your impact. The funding will all go to the lead institution, but you can have as many subawards, subcontracts, consultants as you like, but that's to be handled by the lead institution. And in fact, you can describe and should describe very briefly how you would use the Hill Prize funding, but we're not requiring a detailed budget, just a short explanation for how you'd use the money. Would you use it to pay salaries for people, to buy equipment, to hire consultants? Just connect, if you will, in a very few words, the connection between the money and making an impact. Next, please. So that covers the sort of the committee and the process. And if you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. But now I'd like to turn it over to Terrence to talk about the materials that are required.
Thank you, David, and thanks everyone for the questions you're submitting. We're getting some great questions. Some of these will be addressed as we go through the presentation, but we'll have time to answer your questions when we get to the Q&A portion in just a moment. So thank you for submitting those and keep them coming. So we're going to go over the required application materials, what you need to submit in order to make your application for the Hill Prizes. First off, there's going to be a cover page that's just going to have your information behind your application. So really, it's the name of the PI, the category that you're selecting, and some other information. This is all spelled out clearly in the application guide, which we've shared a link with to you. And then we're going to ask for a proposal summary and a proposal statement. So if you can advance to the next slide. The applicant summary needs to be 50 words or less. And this is really a succinct explanation of why you should be chosen for the Hill Prizes and what the potential impact of your work is. The next element is going to be your proposal statement, which is going to be 5 pages maximum. We've received a lot of questions about this 5-page limit and the statement and references. And what we're suggesting is that you really focus on answering these key questions that we have listed below, really what problem you're trying to solve and the potential impact of your work. Again, these are all spelled out in detail in the application guide, but references will count towards the 5-page limit. So we're really encouraging applications to only cite a few key publications. There's also an opportunity in your biographical summary to include your 10 most important citations. This differs a little bit from some other federal grant applications that you might be familiar with. We're really trying to succinctly, again, demonstrate the impact and potential of your research for the application selection committee to review. We'll go to the next slide, please. Just one last thing is on the biographical summary, and I apologize, maybe we can go back one slide for just a moment. And one more back as well. And one more, thank you. So the biographical summary is for the principal investigator, and that can be up to 3 pages. You may also submit an NIH biosketch for the PI. If you're going to have additional key personnel, an emphasis on key personnel as part of your application, it's a 1-page maximum for the biographical summary. We anticipate a lot of interest in these prizes, and we really want an efficient process for the application selection committee to review. Okay, that covers the materials that are required. We'll just stay on the slide for one more moment. All of these materials for the first 3 items, the cover page, the application summary, and the application statement, need to be one document. That can be a Microsoft Word or PDF. And then the second can be the biographical summary, which will be a separate document. Both of these will need to be submitted via our online application form. There's a link to that on the Hill Prizes landing page on the TAMEST website, and everyone will receive a link to that that's attended the session as well. So just to emphasize, once again, all these materials will be in 2 separate files, either Microsoft Word or PDF, and they will be uploaded as part of your online application form. We were not accepting letters of support or letters of recommendation. They will not be considered, and please do not submit those as part of your application. Okay, we'll move on to the funding requirements, and then we'll get into our Q&A for today's info session. These are also listed in the application guide and on the TAMEST website, but any selected recipient of the Hill Prizes will retain full intellectual property rights. We do ask that any expenditures from the prize follow the spending policies of your home institution, because the institution will receive the funding, not the individual recipient. For the prizes, we're not going to allow institutional overhead or indirect charges. We're patterning that after some similar grants that we looked at for this prize program. The PI or team lead has to be from a Texas institution, as Dr. Daniel mentioned earlier. There's a requirement that they stay at that institution for at least 1 year after receiving the prize funding. The funding will remain with the institution or company that receives the prize, and there's no specific requirement for how quickly you must use the funding, but the expectation is that you will use it in a timely manner in order to move this research and work forward. There is a requirement for the PI or the team lead to be able to attend the prize ceremony, which will take place on Monday, February 5th, 2024, at the opening reception of the TAMEST 2024 conference in Austin, Texas. And if selected, the prize recipients will coordinate with Lyda Hill Philanthropies directly on the funding schedule. There's also a requirement that you will need to provide an impact statement on your work every year annually until after you've expended the prize funds. Really, we're looking for an explanation about how the funding was used and what kind of impact you're seeing as a result of that funding on your work. We will provide a template to the selected recipients for that impact statement. And with that, we're going to move now into the Q&A. I see we have over 20 questions, which is great, and also a hand raised or two. For the Q&A, you have two options. One which, again, glad to see folks submitting questions. You can submit a written question in the Q&A. If you would like to ask a verbal question, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you, and you'll have a chance to ask your question verbally after we unmute you. And with that, we're going to start going through the questions. I'm going to bring David back in here, as well as Stephanie and Brendan. And we'll just go through these as they were submitted. So we've had a couple questions on the 5-page statement. One is, where do you place the reference list? Does that count against the 5 pages? We are, and we'll ask David to add on to this as well, but references do count towards the 5-page statement. So we really are encouraging people to limit references. David, do you have anything you want to add on that question?
Yes, this is not an NSF proposal, and so it's a proposal about impact. So as Terrence said, if you've got a few key references you want to cite, feel free to do so, but the review committee is not going to be evaluating your proposal based on your ability to cite numerous references. Few key references to make sure you want to give proper credit, but focus on the elements we mentioned here rather than an extensive literature review.
Dr. Daniel, I'll ask you to follow up on that because we have two questions closely tied to that, which is figures. So graphs, tables, visuals, histology, are those going to be an important part of that 5-page statement? And are there requirements on pixel size or image quality for the images and graphs for that 5-page statement?
I don't think that there are pixel requirements for the graphs. I know that we've got requirements on the font and so forth for the 5 pages. So yes, the figures count for 5 pages. We did not make this easy for the applicant. It would have been a lot easier if we'd given you 15 pages. We're making it hard on you purposefully, because if you're going to have an impact, you've got to be able to tell, from my point of view, you've got to be able to tell your story highly effectively in 5 pages. And whether you choose to use figures or not, I think will partly reflect your skill and acumen in selling your idea and telling your story. And communication is an important part of having an impact. So we've left it up to you. We've not put restrictions on it. But I would just say how well you tell your story will impact your success in the review process.
Great. I'll get to this next one briefly. It's on team members, if they can be from outside of Texas, as long as the PI is, and are multi-institutional applications desired or discouraged. I would say multi-institutional applications are definitely encouraged. Dr. Daniel spoke about that a little earlier in the session. And we are allowing a key collaborator on the proposal outside of Texas, as long as they are really able to provide some unique critical expertise to the team. But really, we want the focus of these applications and these proposals to be Texas organizations and institutions. Dr. Daniel, anything you'd like to add there?
No, I would just say I would expect some applications basically to be from a single individual and others to be from a complex team. And I would say there's no bias one way or the other. I think as we review the applications, we'll be asking the question, does this team make sense to maximize impact? And depending on what the idea is, a big team may be needed, or it may be a small team is much better. So just make sure you have alignment with your goal of making a difference in the world.
Thank you. Next question is, an institution or entire university or different schools considered different institutions? So if there's a college of engineering and a college of natural sciences, are those considered different institutions? The answer is we're looking at institutions in the sense of a health center, or health science center, or medical center, or a research university would be considered an institution. A department or college would not be considered separate institutions. And to answer that question. Dr. Daniel, anything you want to add on that one?
Nope, I agree.
All right. This next one's a good question. Can a PI submit multiple proposals on distinctly different topics? And I'm going to turn that one right over to you, Dr. Daniel.
Sure. If you, we're looking for the best ideas. So if you want to submit 2 proposals in 2 separate categories, so long as they're completely different, I'm okay with that. Great,
thank you. We have a question on whether submissions have to go via the institution, or can it be submitted directly by the PI rather than the university? So the applications can come directly from the PI. We are asking all applications to have institutional approval, which we covered a little bit earlier in the session. And we have additional information included on that in the frequently asked questions on the TAMEST website. That's a self-reported institutional approval, but we think it's best for both the applicant and the institution to make sure that leadership at your institutions are aware that you're submitting those applications. Dr. Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
Nope, I agree.
All right. Next one is mathematics and statistics considered to belong to physical sciences category. I believe the short answer to that is yes. Dr. Daniel, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think there are some areas that could go in multiple places. Computational sciences would be one. It depends on what you're computing. So we're just going to put the burden on you, the applicant, to decide, well, which category most closely matches my idea. We do reserve the right to move them if we think you've just really made a poor choice. But I would say pick the one that to you seems the best aligned.
This next question follows up a little bit on that one, which is, if the topic is at the intersection of 2 of the categories, for instance, engineering and medicine, what criteria should applicants use to determine which category to apply in?
You want me to take that one, Terrence? So
sure,
I'll leave that to
use
your best judgment. I think they're going to be a lot like that. We in the O'Donnell Awards, we see this challenge all the time. There's a biological sciences researcher whose research is focused on a medical application. To some extent, it may depend on how far along the idea is on this TRL level per DoD talk. Is it fairly early stage? Is it later stage? I mean, if it's, let's say it's a biological sciences idea and you're still back there pretty deep into the science, but it ultimately has a medical application, you may be better off in biological sciences. If you're further along the pipeline and you're getting close to being ready to use this on patients, it may fit better in the medical. Brendan, I see you're still on the line and you're the medical expert. And we do expect a lot of applications in the health sciences and medical field. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think that you hit it right on the button in terms of that sort of translational, basic to translational timeline. I would add that something we can take back to the committee is do something that we've done over the years with the O'Donnell Awards, which is the committees have leeway to propose transfer between the sections, and that has been effective. If for some reason a committee feels this really is not perfectly in their domain, there has been a cooperative sort of interaction among committees to transfer proposals, and that could be done here, and we can certainly check on that. I don't know, David, that seems like a reasonable approach.
It does, and that's one reason in our schedule we get the committees together and we prep the subcommittees to do just that. I would just add that we're looking to maximize the chance that the great idea rises to the top. We're not looking to squash ideas, we're looking to raise ideas. So if we think a application would be more competitive in a different category, that would be our rationale for moving it, not the opposite where we think it would be less competitive. We're looking to help make sure we pick the best possible winners.
Great question. So two questions that will I'll answer one of them, and the second one, let's go to Dr. Lee on. So is a hospital considered industry? Generally, a hospital, Houston Methodist or Dem Medical, for instance, would be considered part of the academic and health centers categories. So we would look for applications within those, most likely medicine or biological sciences categories. The next question is on the 15-year clock, and Dr. Lee would love your thoughts on this one. When would that clock start for a physician? Would it start at the time of their first attending appointment, or would residency and fellowship training also count towards that 15-year timeline?
Yeah, this issue of when does the clock start for a physician scientist always comes up. I think it's less relevant for this prize because usually for things like the O'Donnell or early career, it's a cap. And so where the start really limits an individual. Here, there's no, and oftentimes because of that, there's this gray area of when you may be appointed as faculty as an attending physician, but you're still doing mentored research, and therefore you're not truly independent. And so again, that sort of pushes the clock back sort of a bit. For this, the purposes here, I don't see that there's any issue of not starting the clock at the first attending appointment, because if any, it increases the pool, not decreases the pool. So I think for the purposes of the Hill Prize, that's the point where you get your first faculty position as often driven by the attending component of your career path. Fellowship, residency would be excluded. That would not be part of that.
Thank you. All right, I have a couple formatting questions. I'm going to try and go through these relatively quickly. So is there a format for the one-page bio per team member? And we had another question, if there are additional team members, is it one-page bio for all of them together or one-page bio each? It'll be a one-page bio each. Again, if you're going to have additional team members, co-PI, we really encourage you to only include a one-page bio for each of them for really the key members of the team, so that, again, it can be an efficient review process for the selection committee. We don't have a format for those one-page bios. This is the first year of these prizes, so no format is available. The NIH BioSketch are usually maximum 5 pages. So if using an NIH BioSketch, does the 3-page limit apply? I think for this first year, in the interest of efficiency, Dr. Daniel, if you agree, we can just accept a standard NIH BioSketch, even if it exceeds that 3-page limit. But do you feel differently?
Yeah, I do. We said 3
Okay.
pages, and I think we ought to stick with 3 pages. So take that
I'm
5
glad I
pages
asked.
and condense it.
So if you're going to use an NIH BioSketch, please condense it to 3 pages. Thank you. Is the cover page part of the 5-page application, the applicant statement? That is not part of the 5-page application. So you have a 1-page cover page, and then you have your applicant summary, and then the 5-page applicant statement. This next question will go to Dr. Daniel to tell us more about, but is there overhead charged? Is the question, and believe that has to do with indirect and overhead.
Sure, no, we
budget
do
policy.
not allow indirect charges or overhead. That's just not permitted. I've actually been through those discussions many times over the years, but we are not allowing them. If you're at a university, this would be considered a gift, if you will, because there's no overhead associated with it. And note that we do not require a report. That at a lot of places is a key factor on whether something is considered a gift or not a gift. All we require is an annual statement that we can use publicly of how things are going. That could be anywhere from a sentence to a page. We want to share with the world your good work. So that's not in our minds a report at all. But no, we do not allow indirect costs. However, remember we said that the funding just needs to follow the institutional rules. So anybody, at least in my world always, anyone who's working on a project, it could be an administrative assistant. If they're actually working on the project, you can make those direct charges to the project. You just can't take a blanket indirect or overhead. But all direct charges, relevant to the work are allowed. And as Terrence mentioned, the spending has to follow the institutional spending rules. But other than that, we're leaving it up to the institutions to make sure that that's the case. And I'll just reiterate, we're not requiring a detailed budget. All I'm doing is strongly encouraging you to have a brief statement about how you would use the money. Because remember, one of those criteria really was the ability of the team to execute the work. So relate the money just in a general way to how you're going to execute the work.
Thank you. So kind of picking up on some of those questions or questions on institutions and how many applications they can submit. Really, we're encouraging institutions to really focus on their 2 or 3 best per category applications, but we don't want that to be limiting. We just want to really have the best applications move forward. And a question on how many prize awards per year. There's 5 in 5 categories. And should the school grant specialist submit the grant application or the PI? That is up to the applicant. If the school grant specialist will be submitting the application, we do have a section on the form where they indicate that they're submitting it on behalf of the PI. Do you allow subcontract awards? We do, as we've mentioned earlier, if there's a collaborative application. Any subawards would be handled by the lead institution. So as we mentioned earlier, if you're doing a collaborative application or a multi-institution application, you do need to identify a lead PI, a lead institution. If selected, the funding would go to that lead institution, and then they would handle any additional subawards from that point. Dr. Daniel, anything you want to add on either of those questions?
Nope, you covered it well, Terrence.
All right. These couple next ones will look to Dr. Lee. So where would medical imaging advances fall? In the technology category, the medicine category? Would it be a private sector hybrid team? And Dr. Daniel will look to you on this one as well. Again, similar question, if you had a digital tool used for healthcare, would that be better placed in medicine or technology?
So I think I would lean on what Dr. Daniel had also mentioned. I would say, again, the technology component category is focused more on private, research organizations or industry. So certainly who the lead is helps to determine that. I think if especially it is imaging in the medical space or something akin to that, where you're moved out of the basic principles or research and more into sort of implementation or validation, that could potentially be, again, more in the technology aim component of it. But again, I think that the committees themselves will certainly weigh these issues, and I could imagine that there would be some back and forth between the technology versus the engineering side of things. David, did you have anything to supplement that with?
No, I agree. I totally agree with you. I would just say if a business is a lead, a for-profit entity is the lead, that technology category is where they need to be, because clearly that's not early in the pipeline of discovery.
Great. We're getting a lot of questions and we have about 15 minutes left. So in the event that we don't get to your question today, we are going to capture the questions that have been submitted and we will make sure they are addressed on our website in the frequently asked questions sections of the Hill Prizes. We'll give this question to Dr. Daniel. Does the review committee have a priority for research topics? For instance, their research is engineering based, but the application is in healthcare. Again, we've seen a couple of these questions of kind of what's the best category for applicants to focus on for their submissions.
Well, so we have selected for subcommittee members, people with broad sets of experiences, people who have reviewed work outside their own area. So I wouldn't worry about the selection committee, if you will, determining where you're going to put your application. We've talked earlier about just picking the one that makes the most sense to you. And if we think it would be more competitive in a different category, then we will move it. And I mentioned before that we will select the external reviewers after we've down selected to the top 3, because we want to tailor the external review expertise to what those proposals actually, the top 3 are. So there'll be a bit of a honing process, if you will, in the external review element toward the end of the process.
Okay, again, another question on references. Can references be links to websites? We are allowing that for your 5-page statement if you want to link to a website to include references. Again, we're trying to make this process efficient for both applicants and the selection committee. Dr. Daniel, this is a good question. It's kind of similar to, is it okay to have a key collaborator that's outside of the state? Is it okay to have a key collaborator that's outside of the US, outside of the country?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, and we just want to maximize the impact. And I would add to what Terrence said, the review committee members will get electronic versions. So if you've got a link in your version, they'll be able to click on it. Having reviewed a lot of these myself, I would encourage you not to overuse that. If you put 15 links in your proposal, you're going to frustrate the reviewer, and that may not be to your advantage. But if you've got 1 or 2 key links that tell a story, the reviewer may want to click on that link and go see what that has to say. But don't overuse that, would be my advice to you. And with regard to US or international, again, just if there's a key person who really can help maximize your impact, go find that key person wherever they might be as one of your team members.
Okay, thank you. So another question on bios for the NIH bio, if it's 3 pages, reduced to 3 pages for the PI, and then it's max 1 page for each additional key personnel. Again, we don't have a standard format for those 1-page bios, but we would just encourage you to keep them succinct and really focus on key personnel of any team application and only submit a 1-page bio for each of those additional key personnel.
And Terrence, if I may jump in real quickly, one reason why we don't have a required format is the bio from somebody, let's say from a major oil company in the technology sector, is going to look very different from the bio of a physicist at an academic institution. So there's a reason for not necessarily having a template, because we expect a great breadth of types of people listed as key personnel. And maybe even as principal investigators too. That same line of reasoning applies to PIs as well. I think it'll be a pretty eclectic mix of people.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions on the indirect policy and overhead. So let me get to this one real quickly here. So for some institutions, they have a charge of 5 or 6% on any gift or grant, even if there is no overhead charge. Dr. Daniel, what would you say to applicants if they have a concern about that?
Yeah, we are not allowing that. I've been at places that have that sort of requirement, and we're just not allowing it in this case. But I would say, to offset that a little bit, any direct charge of work done on the project is allowable. And again, that may include administrative support if they're working on the project.
Okay, let's go to, we've had a couple questions on, how long is this program going to go for, and will this be an annual program? The Hill Prizes currently are for this year and will be awarded in 2024. And if we have any updates later in the year, we'll be sure to share those. Questions on timing of funding and the funding rate. Is there in the not budget, but in the kind of how the funding would be used part of the applicant statement, Dr. Daniel? Is there any preference for how quickly that funding would be used?
No, we've not put any requirements on that. As Terrence mentioned earlier, our expectation is that you will spend the money at the rate that will maximize the impact. And we do require just an annual statement on how things are going until the money is spent. But the reason for that is simply that this could be a pretty broad mix of 5 winners, and one size fits all is not as good as just giving each of these 5 winners maximum flexibility in using the money to make a difference.
Okay, here's a really good question, and Dr. Daniel will turn this one over to you. Will all submitted proposals receive a score and a feedback? So will the applicants get that score and feedback for their applications?
We had not planned on a feedback mechanism other than letting you know whether you won or lost. But let me take that to the committee and see if we can do a little bit better job than we had planned thus far. One of our challenges is we don't know how many applications we're going to get in each of the categories. We would love to give feedback if it's practical, but I'm not sure it will be. So let me just take that as a very helpful suggestion. And the answer is no commitment at this time to anything other than you won or you didn't win. But if we can, we'd like to provide some constructive feedback to people, particularly if there's reason to believe that the program might continue beyond the first year.
Thank you. Had a couple questions on budget. Again, no budget is required. We do want part of your 5-page statement to address how you would use the funding. That doesn't have to get too specific, but it's really want you to make an argument about why this funding would make a difference in accelerating your work and having an impact. A couple questions on institutional approval. Does that require approval of a budget? Again, we're not requiring or asking for detailed budgets as part of these applications. But Dr. Daniel, we do have a question on if institutional approval means that an administrator at the institution has read the application.
That's up to the administrator. Every institution or company has identified a person authorized to accept the funds. It may be a chief development officer. If it's a gift, it may be a chief research officer. It may be a chief business officer. So for the applicant, just make sure you have the approval of the cognizant and authorized individual. Whether they want to read your application or not is up to them.
And to follow up on that, do we expect institutions to screen the proposals before giving the institutional approval?
No, well, yes and no. Yes, we expect the institution that gives the approval to have done whatever due diligence is necessary on their part to make sure they want to approve the application, right? So there's a due diligence part. But as mentioned earlier, we encourage institutions that may have many applications in a particular category to identify the best 2 or 3 and only give approval to those 2 or 3. But we're not requiring that. If the institution is simply not comfortable doing that, they may submit more than 2 or 3 in each category.
Maybe, David, I can also add that I think what we want to avoid is a situation where a winner or a proposal is selected and the institution says we're not accepting this. I think that's really an important sort of, it's really more a floor than a ceiling in terms of asking for signatures and so forth. It's really to prevent that scenario. Do you agree with that, David?
I do agree with that. And I think from my experience and having dealt with a lot of these in the past is that the friction point may be the overhead, or somebody mentioned in a question, the 5 to 6%. So an institutional approval will require, let's say that's the normal practice, waiving that for this particular project. So that's one of several key reasons why the institutional approval is necessary.
Okay, we're working through the questions here. I have a couple of minutes left. I have a question on, again, grant duration and how quickly the money, if selected, should be spent. Should it be over 1 or 2 or 3 years? I think as we've discussed, and Dr. Daniel, please feel free to add to this, but it really kind of depends on the nature of the research and the work. We do want it to be used efficiently and expediently, but there's no set time frame for how quickly the funding must be used. Dr. Daniel, anything to add?
Nope, agreed.
Okay. So I think that answers a couple of questions on the funding. Again, 5 proposals. If selected, the lead institution will coordinate with Lyda Hill Philanthropies on the distribution of the funding. And this is a good question. Does the PI have to be from the institution that is submitting the application, or can the PI be from the collaborating institution?
In my mind, the PI must be from the institution submitting the application. Those two are inextricably linked.
Another great question is confidentiality of ideas guaranteed? So if the application isn't funded or selected, does the idea stay confidential? Dr. Daniel,
Yes,
we'll send that one to you.
It does stay confidential. TAMEST may want to have a conversation with an applicant who doesn't win if we or someone on our committee has some thoughts about an alternative pathway to help you, but that would be done in confidence with you only. So yes, Terrence, at least for the review committee and internally within TAMEST, it's confidential.
Okay, I think we're getting close here. Let's see. This is a good question, so I'm going to make sure we get a verbal answer to this one. Again, if we didn't type or verbally answer your question, we were collecting all these questions that you've submitted, and we will post them in the frequently asked questions on our website. Usually the late stage of a project is focused less on innovation. So how do you focus on innovation and quick practical impact during the review process?
Well, I'm not quite sure what that question is asking. I think each application needs to explain what the circumstances are around your idea and really make the case for what's necessary to get from wherever you are to impact. What is that bridge that needs to get built, and how is the $500,000 going to help you and the team build that bridge? So I don't have a pat answer to that question, but I think that's a key to making an effective winning proposal, is just laying out the case of what's the problem you're trying to solve, why are we not getting it solved, and how are you going to solve the problem that's going to make a big impact. And again, that could be at various stages of development. Brendan, do you want to add anything?
Yes, and I think that this is always challenging, especially if you're a late stage development or you're a company and you may already have funds in support of a product development line. One way to think about it is this prize will really be part of that, and therefore the impact even in the product development will be incremental or part of a larger pool that may not be as desirable. Unless, for example, you would address the use of the funds in a way where, it would be to take an existing product to go to a different application or an extension, which really would have impact and would not have otherwise been done. So I think those are kind of the considerations for, especially projects or targets which are further along in development, especially on the commercialization side. So while I wouldn't necessarily, exclude those, it is important for you to make the case of why the prize would on its own serve an important function in expanding or broadening the impact of that product.
And I would add, Brendan, one of the first review criteria I mentioned is the uniqueness of the idea. And so for late stage, it may be a very unique and very powerful idea, or it may not be so unique. I would just say those ideas that are more unique than others and more powerful than others are bound to resonate better with the review committee members.
Well, thank you, Dr. Daniel and Dr. Lee. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. We answered close to 60 questions, which is great. We have a few left. And again, we will be addressing those and updating our frequently asked questions on the TAMEST website. We're also going to have video and slides of today's session that will be emailed to you and as a follow-up. All the application guides, the eligibility requirements are all online at our website at tamest.org. You're going to receive a short survey at the end of this, and we'd love to hear your feedback on the info session. It's also a good place to ask any additional questions you might have about the Hill Prizes. Lastly, we'd like to invite all of you as part of our greater research community to join us in February at the TAMEST 2024 annual conference in Austin, Texas. It'll take place February 5th to the 7th at the AT&T Center. Got a very exciting and timely theme of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and an excellent program committee that's putting together a wonderful program for that conference. It's open to the greater research community, and if you're faculty at a TAMEST member institution, you do get a discounted rate to attend. We're going to look at some interesting questions and applications of AI and ML. And it's also going to be a special celebration because we're going to have an opportunity to mark 20 years since TAMEST was founded, as Dr. Lee mentioned, by Nobel laureates Michael Brown and Richard Smalley and the Honorable Kay Bailey Hutchison. Again, the opening night of that 2024 meeting, February 5th, we're going to recognize and celebrate the inaugural recipients of the Hill Prizes. We have more info on that on our website as well. Once again, the deadline for applications for the Hill Prizes is August 11th, 2023. If you have additional questions that weren't answered today, or any other thing anything else you want to reach out about during the application process, please contact us by email, tamest@austinutexas.edu. Want to thank Dr. Daniel and Dr. Lee again for joining us, and all of you for being here today. Looking forward to seeing your applications, and thanks again. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.